the polyfill is basically like a JavaScript implementation of something that would otherwise be natively implemented in the browser. So there is a library that is called platform.js, and I guess this isn't a secret anymore. So it's going to be renamed webcomponents.js soon, and it's kind of indicates that this is just a generic library for doing web components. We're providing polyfills for things that web components need, whether you're using Polymer or anything else that's taking advantage of those functions. So basically, you want to include this polyfill at the top of your page, and you have much better browser support. And there's another file that you'll end up including on your page, and that's the Polymer.js, and that's what actually is like the core of Polymer. This is where you get like the nice syntactic sugar for creating elements, the nice templating, bound variables, and things like that. So there's basically two JavaScript files that you want to include on every page. And with the polyfill, it looks better. And actually, this is, yeah, so this is what it looks like in polyfill. So pretty good support. And this is for the latest version of all those browsers. So, we're not talking about IE 8 when we have IE, but it's definitely a lot better. And I think, we are folks at Google who work on the Open Web platform, folks at Firefox who work on the Open Web platform, folks at IE also are moving forward and trying to make sure that these things that are done as these standards get implemented as well as possible. And I know that the Internet Explorer just recently had this kind of like voting, community voting thing for what features you want to see implemented in IE, and that a lot of very core pieces of functionality that Polymer makes use of, and that any sort of kind of web component library would make use of. We're very high on the list. So hopefully, the IE team will take that into account and actually go and implement them. In the meantime, though, you do have these polyfills that you can use. Okay, so let's see. We are going to talk a little bit about sorry about that. And okay, yeah. So this just gives you a little bit. This I think is what is going to take a lot of time if I run very thoroughly for all this. So you might need to get these slides. Again, they're at academic.com, academic, and you can look through these at your leisure if you want. But I think this just gives you an example of what you get with Polymer versus if you were to do the same thing using just plain old vanilla JavaScript, and you can use these things. So there's like a register element call, and instead of doing register element call, you could have this Polymer element declarative way of registering element. And something similar for handling extensions of existing elements. There's a Polymer way of doing it. So this is kind of the syntactic sugar that you get from using Polymer. Templates, Polymer way of doing templates. These are those kind of template repeats. That is something that you get from Polymer. That is not part of the HTML template spec. So like you do the template repeat, and you have bound variables, and this is again using object observability. So if something changes in the variable that it's bound to, the UI gets updated instantly. So we'll talk more about that in a bit. Shadow DOM, related triggering. Yeah, so this is what you would have to do if you wanted to play around with Shadow DOM without using Polymer. And get it more or less, I don't want to say perfect, you get it in a much nicer way if you play around with Shadow DOM if you're using Polymer. You just have a template tag within your Polymer element, and that is Shadow DOM. And that, again, spans completely separate from the rest of the page. You don't have to worry about things flashing. Okay. Yeah, so, you have those tags. So, what if you can take things like H1UL, instead of building your apps on those, you add animated pages, you add menu buttons, you have page scaffolds. Obviously, that would help a lot the way you go and build apps. And yeah. So this is an idea of what if we were to start kind of from scratch and design things that we know app developers need with a focus on responsive design and making sure things look nice across different platforms. So this section is showing off kind of the Polymer implementation of material design elements. And I know that this is kind of a topic that's a little confusing, like what is material design, what is Polymer, are they the same things, how do they relate, all that. So let me just spend a little bit of time before we go into this, making sure that folks are clear on what the terms are that I'm using here. So material design is kind of like a style guide, let's say, for pretty much doing everything that would appear in applications. It's a style guide for what buttons should look like, what your layout should look like, or when to use animations, what shadows mean. And it's a very community style guide. It's Google specific. It's kind of like something we announced at Google I/O, and for folks who have seen the Android 5 release, like the Lollipop release, that uses a lot of material design natively. I think some of the Google web properties, eventually will use material design as well. And the idea is you must have a very consistent language for building web applications and have it look nice also. So that's material design. It's implemented natively in like the latest Android SDK. So there's these elements that will, look material designing that you can use from Android apps. And the question is, okay, that's great if you're doing stuff in Android. What if you're building web applications, either desktop web applications or web applications that are going to be used on mobile devices too? Like, what's the solution for doing material design in that? And the nice thing is there actually is a solution that's implemented as a bunch, as like a collection of Polymer elements. So this is not the only way to do material design on the web. I think Angular is probably working on something very similar. I know that there might be just at some point there might just be a set of CSS classes and JavaScript for implementing all this that you can use without having to use Polymer. But for now, at least, this is kind of like a real nice first-class implementation of a bunch of different material design concepts that you can use right now in your own applications if you want your applications to look like Google applications. Which, I think it looks pretty nice. Folks seem to be pretty happy with material design.
Sorry, I think I missed something. This is an import? You're like importing material stuff?
Exactly. So like each of the individual pieces, like there's a button, there's a Polymer element for like that circular button that has a shadow. They're kind of like what's called paper floating action button. So you import that on your page, and then you say paper fab, and then have some content. And there's actually this whole section just talks about this. So let's just go through that. So here's the idea. You have the paper fab. That's what that is. You have draw panel. You have core icons. So you get all that for free, more or less. These are elements that have already been written by people in the Polymer project at Google and have been published. So you can use them now and build applications using them. And there are the types of things that you might think about as like standalone HTML elements, like a button. There are also some pretty complicated kind of like scaffolding type custom elements that you can use to handle all the like very like high level base interactions under your application. Like this is when you show the side menu, and this is when I hide it, and this is how I handle scroll things that are scrolling around the page and all that sort of stuff. So they're both those types of elements that you think of as more traditional and kind of higher level scaffolding and glue that keeps everything together. There's a list of all these. Let me pull this up real quick. Probably good time to do that. So go to the Polymer project. So polymer-project.org is the main website for Polymer. And if you wanted to play around with some of these elements that we're going to be talking about, here, this is Polymer section. Polymer collections. So this has a list of what we call the core elements, and then the paper elements, and then some guides for using elements. So you can think of the core elements as elements that don't really have material design, but they do some very kind of important things that lots of applications would need. And things like making AJAX requests, or doing key handling that takes accessibility into account, and doing animations, and it does have some things like core icons, and like the paper buttons will actually use these core elements, and they will compose it and make something that looks very papery. So they'll build on top of kind of these core elements that a lot of folks will use. And then if you look at the actual paper elements, you'll see things that we'll talk about in these slides. And these are a whole bunch of things that you could import. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's any reason why this wouldn't work in Chrome apps. I think that if you're doing vulcanization to combine everything together, that there's something specific that you need to pass in to make sure the content security policy is properly configured. But yeah. And yeah, again, just to give you some idea of what you get. So there's a very consistent set of docs for all Polymer elements, and this is actually something you get for free. If you're writing a Polymer element, there's this page called core doc viewer. Sorry, there's this element called core doc viewer, and it knows how to inspect the JS docs and Polymer elements and render everything in a very nice way. So, yeah. So the basic idea is, let's say you want to start using these paper elements in your app. You go here, you look up the docs, you see examples, you'll see a list of the attributes that it supports. Some things expose methods, some things expose events. If there are any methods or events, they'll be listed there. And kind of just go one at a time, learn about each of these things, figure out how to use them, start using your app, play around with it. Okay, let's jump back to the rotation. All right, so yeah, those are core elements. Yeah, we'll just talk about that. Some examples of core toolbar. Import it, you say, core toolbar, and then we have a child of that. So you actually can use this just like standard HTML elements that have children. Depending upon how the element is implemented, and we'll show you that when we get to the demos. You can say that your element takes children and will render child element however you want. In this case, like the core toolbar has a child, it's my app, and here it will get rendered in the upper left corner as a title. Great. So, basic idea of how you do a toolbar. And yeah, you can put in buttons too. So I think this is an example of having a menu button right next to my app. So you just start adding things in. It's really fun. You can start with something very, very basic and then start dropping things in and see how your app changes. And there's no long compile steps or anything like that. You can get really quick feedback. And yeah, there's more examples. There's header panels for doing really these UI patterns that are very common in mobile apps. We have implementations for doing that. Idea of what that looks like. There's some scrolls like that. You, again, not completely for free, you need to learn how to use these, but once you learn how to use it, you'll find, okay, I can build something that I never would be able to build if I were just writing JavaScript without a library. So, yeah. Just start like that. And yeah, so there's attributes, just shows examples of how you pass in different attributes for configuring elements. It's kind of interesting because when you start building your own custom elements, I mean, it's really, you're defining an API. You're defining this is how people are going to be interacting with my element. And I think that the core elements, and the ones that have like a core component that are the official Polymer elements and paper elements, those tend to have a very consistent interface. So hopefully folks will get comfortable with using them. If you're picking up random elements that other people are writing, it's not, it could be hit or miss. I mean, it's like picking up just a random, JPEG or whatever, right? It might make absolutely no sense at all how you interact with it, or it may make perfect sense. So, reading the docs for all these things, figuring out what the attributes are, figuring out what the integration points are, is super important.
Is the Polymer replace the DWT or?
I mean, they're really orthogonal. Like, I mean, you could have a GWT application that had Polymer elements on the edge. So it's not really. It's not really like one is a replacement, like Polymer is a replacement for DWT or anything else. Yeah, some more examples. Corridor panel has this slide out thing on the left. Here's an example, paper elements, we talked about this a little bit. These are what they look like. If you want to have something that has, you know, the really nice thing is like there's obviously CSS that goes into that, there's JavaScript that goes into that, there's HTML markup that goes into that, and you don't have to worry about it. You just pull that element on the page, it gets automatically inserted, everything gets rendered properly, hopefully, and you get that really nice behavior, if you happen to like that behavior. Actually, like the text flying around a little annoying, but fortunately there's an attribute that you can use to turn that off. So, yeah, that's all. Sorry, question?
Are there any plans for implementing self-closing tags? So no longer needing to put a tag at the end. I mean, I'm supposed to use a slash, but tag it.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. So we're going to have a Q&A afterwards with one of my colleagues who's a little bit more up to date on what some of those kind of really, I guess that has to do with the custom element specification rather than Polymer itself. And you might know a little bit more.
Thanks.
Yeah. And yeah, so more examples, checkboxes, paper ripples for that. Yeah. You see that little circle that extends outwards. So, you know, you see it in native Android applications. You do that in the web. Shadows. This is actually pretty cool. You know, as a shadow effect in a decorative way. Of course, something like this you can do in CSS. So this is kept as a shorthand for the way of doing it in a consistent way in CSS, rather than doing CSS. And styling, so this is kind of interesting. This shows you how you can break through the boundary of the shadow DOM when you want to, and control the actual CSS for the things that you're recording. And you do that with these special kind of, I don't know if this is specific to Polymer or whether there's a standard around this. I'm not 100% sure. But basically this is within your CSS, you can say like shadow, and then it'll start impacting things that are within the shadow DOM of the element. So you can change the color. You know, even though this little thing that's animating right now, that little circle is defined within the paper slider element. From your page that's using that element, you can break through and say, I want it to be, red or blue or whatever else. So you do have that power, but you're not going to do it accidentally. You're not going to shoot yourself in the foot and, change the definition of a certain class name that somebody else happens to be using. And be like, There's an example. So you have paper slider, colon, shadow, and then set the, everything other than the colon, shadow should look like a standard CSS selector. And there's also this special deep, which will, like if you have elements that are within other elements and you don't know exactly where they're being used, you just say, screw this, let's look all the way down, anything that matches this, let's apply this style to that. There's this, and yeah, okay, sorry. There's a nice example of an app that implements a lot of material design things using Polymer that we showed off in Google I/O. You can search for Topeka, Polymer, or you can go there and you can play around with it, and it has all these ripples and shadows and things like that. So give it a try. It actually looks really nice and performs very nicely, and it's pretty cool. I think this is an example of that in action. So again, go to polymerproject.org to take a look at the list of different elements that are part of the official project, and then go to customelements.io and you can see a bunch of elements that other people have written too, and you can use them all, mix and match them within your app. And let's see, so this talks a little bit about other browsers, of course. So there's a project, I think there's a set of elements that Mozilla is working on called Brick, and kind of implements things that are a little Firefox OXE, Firefox OSE. So instead of material design, these are things that kind of look like Firefox OS design. So they're working on that. And that's some set of things. And it's not just browser maker, there's a bunch of, this calls out some useful third-party elements. App Router is particularly nice. It can do single-page app that has routing via hashtags and things like that. You use this element to do that. And it's kind of also something that you need to wrap your head around a little bit. There are these Polymer elements that don't actually have any UI associated with them. Like they're not being used to display something. They're being used, you can write a Polymer element to just have some JavaScript that looks at the hash of the page and will take some action based on that hash. There doesn't have to be a UI for Polymer. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, right. I think that this story is evolving a little bit, and I think there was at the Europe conference this past weekend or something where there were some folks talking about sometimes regular in 2.0 and how that will fit together with web components and Polymer in particular, or maybe not Polymer, just kind of web components. So I think it's evolving. It is possible to do a lot of the same stuff that you do in Angular just using Polymer elements. I think it's a matter of preference. I think that if you've used Angular before and you like it, then probably you should continue using it. If you are somebody who hasn't maybe tried Angular before and not really like the whole model that they impose on how you do things, using Polymer can look very much just like writing basic HTML with a little bit of script thrown in if you're using the right elements and you're doing the right thing. So, yeah, there are different projects right now. I think that the story will get a little bit more cohesive in terms of how to use custom elements within Angular for whenever Angular so yeah, so stuff for routing. This is something that'll do paging. If you have a long list of things you want to automatically paginate it into like, a list of 10 items or whatever. And Adi wrote that. There's this Ajax form element, which is pretty cool. So this will encapsulate all the stuff that you might expect if I'm sure there's some jQuery plugins that do something similar for having form submissions via Ajax and doing validations and things like that. So yeah, there's implementations of that exists. Some apps that were built using Polymer, polymerproject.org. It's all Polymer, it's all the way down. Chromestatus.com is another app that is using Polymer for doing all the Chromestatus.com is pretty cool. It gives you a list of what's implemented in what versions of Chrome, and you can kind of see what's in development and things like that. So, it's using Polymer. The Polymer Designer is another thing that's using Polymer. Not surprisingly, so again, like a little inception-y. But you can give this a try. I think it's a very cool concept. If you go here and look at it, and it's kind of like a visual IDE for dragging around Polymer elements and seeing how they render and hooking up attributes. So, Visual Studio for Polymer, basically. You might find it useful. I don't use it very often personally, but you can give it a try. Yeah.
Can you create other components out of a bunch of other components?
Yes.
So this tool sort of helps with also you can take a button and drop down all this stuff and make this bigger component.
Yes, you can have a packaged component that has the entire UI.
Wow.
Okay. GitHub is using web components for the tags that have time. So they have like a little time tag that will, I think, render like 1 day ago or like 2 weeks ago or something, depending on what the actual value is. But that's the thing. Salesforce is starting to wrap some of their APIs in Polymer components. Here's a couple of things that I've been working on that I'm going to show off now. That's one of my prerogatives by getting to talk. Alright, so let's see. Oops. So let's see. First one. So like I was saying, I used to do a bunch of YouTube-related things, systems programming. The team, I've been taking some things that are common for developers who are using YouTube to use and kind of wrap them in Polymer elements and try to get some best practices things done. So and let me also point out this repo, Google Web Components. This is a really cool repo that has a bunch of kind of like first-party components for Google APIs that have wrappers that should hopefully do the right things. There are a lot of, there are a lot of third parties that have already like written YouTube players, and why not? And that's great. There happens to be like the Google YouTube one that's within here, and so I would check that out. And if you've ever integrated stuff with Google APIs before and you want a Polymer element to do it, chances are there's already one within Google Web Components. So I just put together this Google YouTube video wall component. So this kind of solves some problem that we've heard from a lot of people who have a bunch of YouTube videos and have a website and don't really know how to have a nice way of displaying the YouTube videos on their website in a way that you discover things, and it's not just a hard-coded list of video IDs or hard-coded playlist ID or something like that. Something a little bit more dynamic and something that looks nice and something that works well on mobile devices and all these things that would be really difficult to do kind of by hand for everybody to implement their own. So you could use a Google YouTube video wall to do that. We have a few demos down here. And one of them is, this is just the Google Developers channel that has a whole bunch of videos that myself and my colleagues put out. And this has like search. So under the hood, this is doing YouTube API calls. And it's making searches and it's populating the results in the video wall based on those searches. So, at Polymer, by default, see all these awesome Polymer videos. If you want to learn about cloud or something. Okay, so here, so it gets rendered. This again, it's using like object and observed data binding. It's making new API calls as soon as this UI element changes. It has a template that has like the repeat, and it's rendering these new thumbnails there, and then you could like click on them, you get some material design stuff, and then you get the standard YouTube player. Nice custom. So, why do this? Why use this versus like just using the YouTube iframe embed, for instance? I will tell you why. One of the reasons why you might want to use like the Google YouTube embed, which is what this is using under the hood. And by the way, this is an example of like, there's a Google YouTube video wall component. It is in turn using the Google YouTube component. It's using the floating action button component and a bunch of other components. So it gives you this like a packaged version that has a whole bunch of other stuff. And to give you an example, like, why is this actually more useful than just like having the YouTube iframe embed dropping on the page? I don't know if folks have ever played around with that before, or are aware with some of the mobile development restrictions that are around automatic playbacks of content. But if you're on a mobile user agent, most of them will prevent you from programmatically playing content without there being any sort of user interaction, like there needs to be a tap on the screen to trigger the playback. And this is stuff that both Apple and mobile Safari and also Chrome on Android have implemented. It's just a way of preventing you from I'm on a 5 GB data plan, and there's a lot of fun YouTube video in the background that just ate up all your data, basically. So, okay, that's something not everybody knows about, first of all. So maybe you just don't know about it, and there's this restriction, and you have this play button, which will programmatically start playback, and you realize, oh, this does not work at all on mobile, because doing this programmatic playback will break, and unfortunately, like the YouTube embed just gets into this really messed up state, which is a bug, and they should probably fix that. But why should every developer need to know that I need to detect whether I'm on a browser that supports automatic playback and hide the play button if I am on that browser and show the play button if I'm not on that browser? That's something that you can get for free if you're using the Google YouTube component. Like, it has logic in place that will detect whether automatic playback is supported. It will publish an attribute that you can then bind to and determine whether you want to show a play button or not, depending upon whether it's supported or not. So you kind of have this like ancillary logic that you could package together and make use of. And I think it's a real value add for using this versus just using like the native embed. So that's just one example of why having something that can package together some logic along with some of these core UI elements is actually really useful. So that's an example of that. This is another example. This is something I just was working on this past weekend, so it's a little rough around the edges, but it's kind of an implementation of what's a material design-y reader application, book reader, not Google reader, like like Google Play Books stuff after the thing. So, you know, you get things for free, more or less, like having dialogues. There's just a paper dialogue element that you display on the screen in response to your input. And you get this text input, you get the ripples, you can get these drop-down menus. And this should look familiar to anybody who's used newer Android applications that have the same UI concept. You click on it. This is actually pretty cool in that like, I have it all. So this has a bunch of elements that are coming into play. So it has one which is a markdown element that will pull in some text, take the text, spit out the rendered HTML from markdown that you can then use anywhere you want. So it's real nice composability. You know, the markdown element does not know that there's this other element that wraps around it that's in charge of like formatting this into nice columns and doing you know, doing proper actually chapter. So like, you know, I have something else that's looking through markdown that's telling me how do I do this stuff and making the chapter markers and adding special tags to that. So, you know, this and this animation that you get under the visual CSS animation, but you didn't declare it as part of your polymer element. And yeah, so this is actually supposed to be an offline reader, but that's not working right now. I'm going to try to make it use something called service workers for doing caching of content, and it's going to be cool. So a little bit of a work in progress. But yeah, to show you some of these standard UI elements. Okay, jumping back to the slides now. We can go through schema, so APIs, can be elements. Want to add Google Map. If I can just have this Google Map pad. This is really cool. The nice thing about this, you know, again, you could use some JavaScript to pull in the Google Map on the page. The nice thing about the way the API for this was defined is that there's these attributes, lat and long, exposed on the element, and you could either use them to just say, okay, you know, this is where I want to send my map, but you could also then have a map marker element that's like a child within that, and you can bind the attributes from the map marker to the map itself. And you can look when you drag on the map marker, you can update the map, and you can update anything else that happens to be bound at the same time. So actually, let me just jump back to my demos really quickly. So I have a demo of something I think is pretty cool that shows that off. And this is Google Maps plus the video wall. So this will use, this is also using a Polymer element for getting your geolocation, using the kind of a wraparound browser-based geolocation API. So it's giving you a map marker. You know, top of the page, you drag this around. It will do YouTube API searches based on the latitude and longitude that it reads from the map marker as you drag it around. And everything obviously happens in very, very close to real time. So yeah, this is just searching for real estate. So it's, you know, doing some hard-coded search terms in there. And what's really cool actually is looking at what the markup for that is, because it's super straightforward. So again, we're pulling in this platform, Polyfill. We have a few styles from over here. And so we have a geolocation element. This is going to end up publishing latitude values. It's a little confusing because it's kind of like two-way data binding, and you don't always know what publishing value is most consuming. And the answer is it's both publishing and consuming, and you don't want to let that budge in the house. In this particular case, like the initial latitude and longitude will come from the geolocation, and we have this conditional template over here where we say like only render this part out if latitude is null and longitude is null, and that just shows like the loading screen basically. So you have these if statements and repeat statements within the templates. And yeah, so then you're just saying, you know, I have a Google map, the initial latitude and longitude are going to be set from the geolocation, I have a marker that has the same bound variables and it's draggable, so as soon as you drag the map marker, it's going to update the latitude and longitude bound variables, and I have one more element over here, and that's just saying, in YouTube video wall, one of the parameters is location, and I'm passing in this. And again, object clicker is this really efficient way for detecting that something changed and updating everything. So as soon as something changes, it's going to redo the video search, and it's going to give you these set results. And that's it. So, 81 lines of HTML that you actually have to write. It took me a long time to write Google YouTube video wall, so it's not like you get this magically for free, but you could take advantage of things that other people have written. And the code that you actually have to write tends to be pretty compact. And this also makes use of something called template is equals auto-binding. This is kind of your way. You as somebody who's writing a web application, you don't have to have a top-level Polymer component called my-app and put everything inside of that, because that doesn't really make sense necessarily. Like, you don't have to define a Polymer element just to take advantage of this type of functionality that you get from Polymer. You can have a special template tag called template is equals auto-binding, and then within there you use like all the same bound variables that you put within a Polymer element. So I have a blog post up on blog.polymer-project.org that talks a little bit more about template is equal to auto-binding, but that's what you'll probably end up using a lot. Like, most folks here are not going to just go home and write their own Polymer elements. I mean, they might, but chances are you're going to want to use other Polymer elements that already exist and make use of these bound variables and see how they work. And doing it within a template is equals auto-binding makes that a lot simpler. Sure.
You had 2 miles set for finding the real estate.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you at all.
You have 2 miles set in there for finding the real estate.
Yeah.
Is there anything within Polymer that if you're not in New Jersey where you're 2 miles from real estate, but you're like in Pennsylvania somewhere and 20 miles, you have to explicitly...
Yeah, so I could have, instead of hard coding the number 2 here, the question was kind of like, instead of hard coding these values, could I have something more different? Like, I could have had a slider on the page or some input equals number or whatever, and have the value from that input element bound to a variable, and then instead of having hard coded 2 here, have the name of that variable, and whenever I update one of those in the page, it will update the search, basically. So, yeah.
I meant more like there is nothing 2 miles, so go out to 20, back to 200.
Yeah, so if there's actually nothing 2 miles, then you're not going to get any results, basically. And that's just how I implemented this now. Here. All right, so I'm going to rush through a little bit more. And I'm joining Revolution. I'm not supposed to learn. Go to webcomponents.org, which is a more generic site of web components that's not all specific to Polymer. And there's polymerproject.org. To build, you can use Yeoman. Yeoman is kind of a generator that has a bunch of different scaffolding for common things, like for doing Chrome apps or Bootstrap apps or Angular apps. There's a Yo Polymer generator, which makes it really easy to define your own, to have the scaffolding that you need to define your own Polymer elements. And can't really talk about too much now. Not usually. It's cool though. But yeah, I usually will just start with this. There's this seed element that has all the kind of basic stuff that you need, and then you go and modify it, and then you can publish it. So you kind of can just, yeah, clone that and then make changes and go from there. One of the really nice things for, I guess web development in general is like you could just download this and then just like start a local web server, like just do Python and send simple HTTP server for doing a local web server, and then just play around, like see things. You can also use JSPin a lot, or use the Chrome Dev Editor, or a lot of other things. It's a very lightweight way to play around with this. So you don't necessarily need a whole bunch of tooling to use this. Yeah, so this is an example of seed elements. Very nice videos. That's Adi has a great video on developing things. Chrome Dev Editor. And share, yeah. You can publish something on GitHub that has the web components tagged within your bower.json. It shouldn't pick up every HTML site automatically, which is great. And Okay, so I'm running a little bit longer than I wanted, but I wanted to just pull up a couple of like mud coding-ish demos, and then we quickly do like a Q&A that Rob, my colleague, is going to be involved in via Hangout. So let me just do that, because I think this is really fun, and it would be a shame not to. So okay, we want to build the Polymer. Folks who have been around for a while might remember the blink tag. I think this might be really good for example. How do you want to build a custom element? Let's build a blink tag. Okay, what would that look like in Polymer? How would you use it? So great. Okay. So this isn't going to be so much actual live coding, because I do have some examples already here. So let me just walk you through like what this looks like, basically. Okay, so, and this is in JS, so this gives you an example. You can just see live everything that's going on. In this case, I'm not actually downloading local copies of these elements. I'm using these standard elements that are all posted on polymerproject.org. So I don't have to run Bower and get copies of it. You can just link directly to those. So that's how I'm pulling in the things like the platform.js, and then also this core animation file and the Polymer definitions themselves. So there's this core animation element that we're going to make use of. And this is a kind of declarative way of defining the types of animations that you get, if you were just to do CSS, or if you were to use some of the animation APIs. So you can do it in Polymer. So we're just going to start by defining the Polymer elements. Might just switch this. Turn it around. Or I could probably mirror this way, but whatever. Yeah, so we're going to be defining this element. We need a dash. We're calling it blankety blank. Within here, we have our template. So this is the shadow DOM for the element, basically. It's on the page defined here, but it's not going to actually render until we actually included an instance of the element on the page. And core animation, blah, blah, blah. Where did this come from? How do you know how to use core animation? So the answer is you go to the Polymer project website, you get core elements, and you look through here and you see, oh, core animation. How do you use this? And the docs happen to be pretty good. And this is pretty much taken directly from the docs. So here's an example of an element that fades out over 500 milliseconds. So I just more or less copy those. So this is defining this animation that has an ID, and there's a parameter duration. And you look at what I have over here, pretty much the same thing. Sorry, some of the wrapping is a little bit off, but yeah, has an ID, animation. In this case, duration is 1,000, so it'll be 1 second. And is using this extra parameter called iterations, which is defined in the doc. And I basically just want it to blink forever and ever. So you pass in infinity. And okay, so I have this animation defined. So what else is on the page? We have this container. Again, I don't have to worry about there being any other elements on any page that have an ID container. This is local to my shadow DOM. And you have a special tag content in here. This